a former family specialist and addiction specialist with more than 15 years of field experience in the exploration of human behavior. Here with details is Ed Durso. And hi, Ed, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So give us a little bit of your background, what you did all the way up to what you're doing now.
So originally I started out as a therapist and an addiction treatment specialist. I was really focused on trying to help people do better under circumstances so that they can continue to evolve and grow, not make the same mistakes, not get caught in the same old patterns. And because I always had the idea that, somehow, some way we could do better, but for whatever reason, we fall back into the same old patterns. And I did that for a period of time. And then while I was doing that, I was also studying, I got dragged into a Chinese martial arts school by a friend of mine. I didn't really want to learn how to fight. I had been bullied as a kid, and the last thing I wanted to do was hang around with people who were fighting. But it wasn't about that at all. It actually became a very important part of my personal recovery, but also it became, over time, the centerpiece of the work that I do. So about, when was it, 2005, things were going great. And then New York State cut their funding to the treatment facilities all around the state. And what that did was provoke really a career change, because I decided that I didn't want to continue on that track. It always seemed like the solutions were great up until the moment that you needed them. Like, therapy is really good before to strategize and after to debrief. But in the moment of pressure or adversity or conflict or change, it kind of falls apart. And a lot of times you end up just cleaning up afterwards. So, and I searched for answers because I was looking to be a better person under pressure. And then I started to notice that the way that people were managing stuff was it was kind of like you had to change the circumstances of life. So I would be better if I had less stress, or I would be happier if I had less conflict, or, change unnerves me and I don't like adversity. And it just seemed like it's kind of like, those things are impossible to eliminate from our lives. They actually form the circumstance of our life. That expression, life's what happens to you while you're busy making plans. It's like, we can't get away from that. And since in the last 20 years, it seems like there's even more conflict and adversity and stress. So, there's an expression by Albert Einstein that goes something like, the consciousness that created the problem can't be the one that fixes it. And it always seemed like whenever the solution was, even the new ones, it kind of always seemed like it was a repackaging of the old solution. It's like, better thoughts, better feelings. But under pressure, there's always a difference between who we aspire to be and who we actually are. And you notice sometimes each of us, every person is really two facets of the same person. There's us when we're highly energized and inspired. Mm-hmm. And then there's us when we're completely exhausted and done. And I started to look more closely at my martial arts training, because it seemed like the masters, they train to function at high levels of adaptability and creativity under pressure. It's not like you see a martial artist go, hey, this is too stressful for me, I can't do this. But it's not all martial arts. It's the ones like the noble martial arts, because some martial arts are just brutal and they're about fighting and warfare. But the ones that involve some level of create character development, but even more importantly, some energy management. So in the process of changing careers, I was fortunate enough to be introduced by a grandmaster of Chinese martial arts, and his name was Shifu Tianmin, and he was what I came to recognize as energy independent. And
was it after him that you started your school?
Well, I started the school just before. I mean, it was completely insane. I didn't like school, and I didn't know anything about teaching, and I didn't know anything about running a business. But I decided one day, I woke up and I'm like, I'm going to start a school to teach people how to deal with conflict. And what I knew at the time before I met him is that, like, when we're centered, we're better under pressure. But I didn't know anything about what Hans Selye called in the early 1900s. Hans Selye was the father of stress science. He's the guy who coined the phrase stress, because even as an intern, he saw that people were getting sick in the same ways, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, you know, the ulcers and the kidney problems and all sort of kind of stuff. And he said that demand for energy, he said when stress does harm, when we run out of what he called adaptation energy. And because it couldn't be measured or quantified, it was so far outside of science at that time, everything got focused on the management of stress.
Right.
And so when I met Shifu, he was a force of nature. He would come in completely energized and alive. And I was not the greatest of students. No, not at all, because I was basically functioning from what I called, there was no language to describe this. I had to make it up. I was energy sick, but I could get to center, and I didn't have enough energy to really keep up with the lessons and the demand of lessons. We would train for hours. I mean, like 6, 7, 8 hours straight. I come home, I was so exhausted. I'd sit on the couch and I would shake like I have the flu, and then pass out and wake up like an hour later and eat everything in sight. But he would go through the entire training and the lesson and leave more energized than we started. And I couldn't understand it. Like early on, you know, I was training at a different school, and it was like, if you didn't leave exhausted, then you really didn't try. And he would train me, and I would feel great, not exhausted. I feel energized and inspired. And he would say, okay, we're done. And I'm like, oh, I just upset the master. So I said, no, I'm not tired yet. I still have more energy. He goes, oh, yes, okay, I understand. He goes, American fitness, a little bit crazy. What do you mean, Shifu? Yeah, he goes, because it's all about, like, you go into the gym and you absolutely exhaust yourself. And that's why people have that love-hate relationship with training, because no one likes to be exhausted. When you're that exhausted, when you exhaust your energy, that's stress.
Right.
Exactly. So it wasn't until I wound up having to have an operation 2 years later that he really started to teach me what was really going on. And that's where I made the connection between what qi is in Mandarin and what adaptation energy is in Selye's understanding of stress science. And, you know, all the way from 1916, when Selye first said this, all the way up to the 70s, like, he didn't have access to Chinese medicine in the way that we do now. But what was unique about my relationship with Shifu was we would sit with Google Translate and we would go back and forth, showing each other words across culture until we both agreed that we were observing the same thing. And so when I was recovering from surgery, I was like, one day I was Kung Fu Master. The next day I couldn't even stand up. And he was like, I have to teach you Qigong now. And I was disappointed. I was crestfallen. And he saw the look on my face. I was like, but I'm a good student, Shifu. He goes, no, Eddie, I understand. No, real Qigong, it's the study of energy, bioenergy. And from that point, with a couple of other things, I learned that it's the point of Chinese martial arts primarily, and this is why I got into it in the first place, because it's really about the conflict for our mental health and well-being that's unconditional so that we can function at high levels under any circumstance. And, at that point, I could see that really what this is all about, and the key to happiness and productivity and all this other stuff is not about focusing on productivity and happiness. It's really about managing our energy health. Because when we have a high level of energy, we're naturally adaptable to change. You can tell somebody's centered because they usually have and energized. They usually have they're curious. They have a good sense of humor. Things don't really get to them. But when their energy is low, nothing's funny.
Right. And unfortunately, we are out of time, but I've got to ask, how can people get in touch with you?
All right. So my website is thefiremountainschool.com. And you can start with there. You can send me an email at shifued@thefiremountainschool.com, or the phone number's on the website.
All right, Ed, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. What you've said is incredible, and look forward to learning more. Thank you, Ed.
Much appreciated. Thank you.